welcome to the Art of Being Human. We are dealing with helping children through their crises, and children live through a lot of crises in their life, and I'm particularly concerned about child abuse, and that's what we're focusing on. From about age 6 to about junior high, although there's no particular reason why I shouldn't focus on other years, but I think these are the formative years where a lot of abuse occurs, and this is the reason I want to get into this age group. It's sometimes called the gang age, from say age 6 years old, about first grade, up to about the 8th grade. Now, of course, abuse can last a lot longer than that, or it can be just a short period of time, but whatever it is, it makes an impression on a very young brain. Remember, and I keep going back to this, but it's true, that the brain is not mature until about age 25. But everything that you say to a child, anything that's said to the child or done to the child, is recorded in the brain. And of course, that's true for adults as well. It doesn't stop when they get to a certain age. But their formative years is when they start looking about what the world is like. Is it a safe place? If it is not a safe place. Why is it that I get hurt? Why is it that other people get hurt? Why is it that I get hurt and my neighbors don't get hurt? What's the difference in parents? Why are my parents yelling but other parents are not yelling? Why do we not have enough food but other people have plenty of food? Now, it is actually important for a child to have some kind of stability so that when they grow up, they won't have a problem in understanding the world. It's that they'll be able to look at the world more accurately. Now, if you were to take a person or a child, and if you were able to do brain surgery, and you had the brain open, the person wasn't sleeping, but they weren't feeling any pain because the brain doesn't register pain for itself. So, and you touch a little lancet or some kind of a device on part of the brain, there will be a memory stored there. And the person will remember what it is that's stored there. And so you touch a brain at a certain spot, well, I remember this, and this is what happened. And it's stored. It's like a file cabinet. Everything that happens is stored. Now, the thing that makes abuse difficult is the fact that not only do you remember what happened, but the brain also records the emotions that went along with it. So if somebody kept coming into a child's room at night for not good purposes, and they actually molested the child, well, the child might be terrified. If the child is terrified, when they remember the incident that might be repeated over and over again, they remember the terror that went with it. That's why people get so much PTSD. That's why it's so difficult to get rid of bad memories, because they're not just dealing with the facts. You're dealing with the emotions that you suffered as you went through whatever the facts were. And if you take a young child whose brain is not developed, it's in the process of being developed, and you just pour into it all of these memories, these negative memories, not being able to eat enough, not being able to have friends enough, being made fun of, not being able to do what other children do because maybe of a disability, and the bullying that goes on. Well, what kind of a person is that person going to grow up to be? Remembering all of the horror. And how is that going to shape the memory? Sometimes, and I've heard psychologists say that at the age that abuse occurs, the emotional development stops at that point. The person is basically just trying to stabilize, it's just trying to survive. There's no emotional growth. And so therefore you just have to understand the damage that can be done to a human brain. It actually can cause a brain injury. If you're going to abuse a child, it's not just the spankings or the whippings. All of those things are bad. But what it does to the brain, it causes a brain injury, because that's what the child remembers, and that's what they're going to remember, and they have to have help with this. I am concerned about the amount of violence that children see on television. They see a tremendous amount of violence. Most of the shows that are violent, they should not even be watching, because it's going to give them an impression, one, the world is a violent place, and two, it's normal to have violence. It shouldn't be normal for a child to experience or see violence. This is how PTSD gets started, either going through a dramatic, terrible event or seeing it. Seeing it can also cause PTSD. So the violence in television, I think that parents need to get really on the ball and watch what the children are watching. Not only what they're watching, but what they're doing on the internet. They're being talked to by people who want to molest them, and it's just a terrible thing. The internet can be a very dangerous place for a child, because a child can't sort out what's right and what's wrong, what's dangerous and what's not dangerous, because some stranger can come and groom them into thinking that this is normal, and they think it is normal. I would not want a child ever to grow up thinking that violence was a normal thing. It's not a normal thing. It should never be a normal thing. And we allow children to watch way too much violence. You know, I can remember the old Western shows like Gene Autry, who sang his way through the show, you know, and some of the less potent, you know, better Western shows, half of the time they're just on their horses and they're galloping around here and there. They weren't dangerous, and it always came out all right. But the shows that children see now, they're dark. They're occultic, some of them. They're dangerous, you know. And there's nothing that can make a child feel secure if they're watching that stuff all the time. So let me give you some facts and figures. And these aren't exactly the most modern facts and figures, but they're what I could come up with so far. 20 million children watch television for an average of 5 hours each Saturday morning. Now, it's probably a lot more than that now, but at the time these facts and figures were written, that's what it was. A typical 100 hours of viewing by youngsters portrays 12 murders, 17 gunfights, 21 persons being shot, 37 hand-to-hand fights, 21 sets of violence with a dangerous weapon, 25 stabbings, clubbings, suicide, or rape. Do you really want your children watching that? You know, I wouldn't let my child watch that. It would be age appropriate. It would allow them to grow and let their brains grow at a normal pace, learning normal things. This is the stuff that kids watch, and they shouldn't be allowed to watch it. I have heard, and I believe it's true, that in the course of brain development, the brain develops and it responds as it's developing to the fast-paced images that it sees. And that changes the brain development. Children under 2 years old, it would be better if they didn't watch any television at all. Let their brains grow naturally. Let them learn naturally. They're just at 2 years old, they're just actually beginning to walk. The average age for walking is 15 months. Now, I know a lot of children walk before that, but that's the average age for walking. And their brain should be allowed to develop normally with normal skills, and they learn how to play, and they learn how to play with other children, and they learn how to play by themselves, and they discover things, and they discover they can do physical things. They can hop, they can run, they can jump, and they practice those skills because they want to get better and better at their physical skills. Let a child grow naturally. That's what they should do. I've also read and done research on autism, where an autistic child should probably not watch television at all. Now, that's going to be hard if you have several children and one is autistic. You may not be able to control it that well. But autistic children do respond and get hooked on television, and the fast-paced images, they get hooked on it. and then that's all they want to do is watch television. So if your child is watching television, and they probably will, most do, you need to set limits. You need to make sure it's not violence that they're seeing. You need to make sure that it's age appropriate for their age so that they can learn and grow and not be afraid. They shouldn't be going to bed remembering violent things just before they went to bed. That's just not healthy for them. That should never be. So this is the facts and the figures in terms of how much children see. And it's not just old-time westerns. It's the occultic, deep, dark stuff that's on television that they should not be watching. I mean, who doesn't enjoy a good Perry Mason show or something like that? But at the same time, you don't want to dig into all the poisonings and the stabbings and the music that goes along with it. And music, of course, makes it 10 times worse because you picture what's going on and then the music enhances what's going on. If there was no music, it might not even seem to be so bad. But with the music, it's more intense. So we need to know what children are watching, and we also need to know when children are abused. Abused children don't necessarily tell you that they're being abused for several reasons. For one, they may not realize it's abuse. They may think it's a part of normal behavior because they're groomed for it. You know, somebody will say to them, well, we do this because I want you to be an adult, but that's our little secret, and I know you're special, and so therefore you won't say anything because you are special. And they get to feel special all the time. They're being abused. You know, so you have to watch them. You have to make sure that what's happening to them by other people are normal and not abuse. But they don't always know that themselves. The other is if they don't feel good about it, and if it is abuse, and to them it doesn't feel right, they sometimes don't say anyway because they feel they're supposed to be able to stop it, but they can't. And of course they can't because the person who's the abuser has all the power over them. It's the same thing for men and women and the abuse that occurs in marriage. The woman gets dependent on the man, and the man can abuse her. In some marriages, that's the way it is. And then they're afraid to leave because violence is involved. And if you watch these shows that help people, then you get a taste of all the violence that they're going through. And it's a terrible thing. Who wants a child to see all of that? Who wants adults to see it either? It's something that should not be. So we need to know when a child is being abused, when the child is in crisis, they may or may not talk about it, and you need to know when to intervene. I would talk to a child and ask them what's going on in school. Has anyone done anything to you today? Or if they seem to be upset, they seem not to want to go to school, what happened to make them that way? If they can't talk about their friends and what they're doing in school and they don't get any joy out of it, something's going on. Now, it might be a learning disability and they're having difficulty because of that, but you need to know that too. Or it may be that they're being bullied. A lot of times, a whole class will bully one child. He is a scapegoat or she is the scapegoat. Everything that goes wrong in a child's life or at school, they pin on that one person and they scapegoat that one person, and that one person is to blame for everything. And these children are miserable. They get made fun of, they get bullied, and it's absolutely miserable. So here's some facts about abuse. Sexual abuse accounts for about 10 to 20% of reported child abuse. Now, there's a lot of abuse that's not reported, but we're saying for 10 to 20% for reported child abuse. Child rape, child molestation accounts for 25 to 50% of reported sexual assaults. 95% of the offenders are male. More males will offend and be abusers than female. You know, I think it's interesting, the television shows, I wished I could think of the name. I think it may have been, don't want to mention the name because it may be wrong, but there was a television show in which police, it was like a sting operation. Police who used young-sounding females on the police force to pretend that they are like preteen girls, and they post online. They want company, they want male company, and so forth. And what they do is a lot of men would call them, and they would make arrangements to meet them, and they would bring drinks and all of that. But the whole thing was a sexual thing. And then they would arrest them. It was like a sting. But all of the people who showed up to molest the so-called little girl, or they thought little girl, preteen girl, they were all men. Women never showed up for that. It was always men that they got, and they always arrested the men. And the women just stayed away from that. It's just not typical of a woman. For some reason, I think because of their motherly instincts, because they are female, because they're the ones that give birth, they don't want to molest a child. I'm not saying there are no female molesters. I'm not saying that at all. But the vast majority of sexual molesters are going to be men, not women. 95%, as I said, 95% of the offenders are male, and 85% of the victims are female. It's male against female. How come? There's a power involved here. There's a power issue involved. If anyone is molesting somebody else, it's not just because they have pleasure in doing it. They want power over the other person. Why would you want power over another person? Well, it may well be that the person who's doing the abusing has been abused themselves, and they want to have power over another human being. They're doing it for the power trip. They're not doing it for any other reason in some cases. And so you do get men, basically men, molesting women, and the power is there. They're bigger, they're stronger, you know, and they can be intimidating, and especially if a child is young, the adult is intimidating. Well, he's tall, he's big, he's an adult, you know, he can do what he wants to do, and so therefore they have trouble stopping it. They can't stop it. They don't have the power to stop it. And of course the men, or whoever the molesters are, know right what buttons to push to get a child to respond in a certain way. Females have 1 in 4 chances of being assaulted by age 18. Okay, let me read that again. Females have a 1 in 4 chance of being assaulted by age 18. And you'd be surprised, the stuff that comes over the internet that's just not appropriate for girls, not appropriate for any child for that matter. The average age that incest begins is about age 12. Just as a girl is starting to mature, getting into her teenage years, that's when that occurs. Most incest relationships last from 1 to 15 years. 75% of prostitutes were assaulted, and 50% of drug users assault other people. It's an interesting thing about prostitutes. Many of them don't want to do what they're doing. They really don't want to do what they're doing. But once they get free of it, they go back to it. Why do they go back to it? They're punishing themselves. How do you punish yourself? If you're doing something that you wish you weren't doing and you know it's not right, and you have a chance to get out of it, you may go back to it to punish yourself because you did it to begin with, because your self-concept is so low that you don't, that you just can't get out of it. You go back to it in terms of self-punishment. This is what I deserve, and this is what I deserve. So yes, I would like to get out of it, but I don't get out of it because I'm punishing myself, because since my self-worth is so low, this is what I deserve, so I stay in it. Now, it's not always easy to get out of it either, but if a person does get out of it, they feel so guilty that they can go back into it again because they are punishing themselves for having done it to begin with. It's just something to think about. Let's see, 75% of prostitutes were assaulted, and 50% of drug users assault others. I read that before. 25 to 30% of adults seeking counseling have been sexually assaulted. We used to say, and I think it's still true, for people who become mentally ill, there's a couple of things that cause it. A lot of it has to do with being assaulted, being bullied, and the other is becoming involved with the occultic use. That can make a person very ill indeed, just getting involved with the occult. If I get a chance, I'm going to get into more of that later. But those are two things that end up by being so mentally disruptive that people many times end up in a mental hospital. Now, what do you look for? What comments do you look for if you have a child and you're wondering, is this child being abused or not by somebody else? Or one thing that teachers might want to look for, if they listen to children talk, always listen to children talk, because they say a lot more than just gibberish. They say a lot more. They say things that give a clue that something's wrong. Things like this: he fooled around with me. My mother's boyfriend does things to me. I don't like to be alone with my father. Why would they be afraid of being alone with their father? Maybe it's strict discipline, or maybe there's abuse going on. I'm afraid to go home tonight. Will you help me go live with my aunt? They're really saying things that you have to read what they're saying, and it may be a lot more than what a sentence statement is, and you get the sense that something's going on that's not right. The laws on child abuse are, if you suspect child abuse, you must report it. You have to report it. And if you don't report it, it's a crime. Now, you can report it anonymously. If you think but you're not sure that the abuse is going on, you report it anyway, so a social agency can check and make sure that the child is all right. Because if you don't, then they may be living in a horrific situation that perpetuates itself from one year to the next year, and they're not strong enough to get out of it. So if you need to, if you're a social worker or a teacher or a coach, anyone that's dealing with a child, then you have to be aware of what the laws are in terms of reporting child abuse. Child abuse must always be reported. You have to report it. Now, I was fortunate, and I did report it, but what I did as a counselor, I could always say, and it would be my interpretation, that they had started counseling, this was an issue. Now, either the child is safe or is not safe, and I would have to make that determination, that they were getting counseling, they realized what they were doing were wrong. I was teaching them a different lifestyle, because a lot of people who abuse, they've been abused themselves, and to them it seems like normal activity. To them it doesn't seem like abuse, but it really is abuse. And so there's a certain teaching that you have to do in order to help adults with if they seem to be abusive. If you think the child is in danger, you have to report that, and the child is removed from the families. Now, everyone complains about the welfare department, but I was fortunate. They bent over backwards to keep parents and children together. They did not want to separate families, and if the person wanted Christian counseling in the families, then they automatically referred them to me, and I got them for counseling, and I would work with them. And a lot of if you do it well, and if they're responsive to you, you can bring families back together. And this is, of course, what we always try to do. So it's important that you understand that child abuse has to be reported, and that people who are skilled can go into a situation and assess it to find out if there is abuse going on, and then they can deal with it, whatever is best for the child. Always the child has to come first. Well, I can see we're running out of time, so I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this next time, because I'm doing this whole section on children and how to help them go through their own crises. So please join me next time.